Everyone, it's Katie from Katie Loves Classic Books, and I'm here today with my October wrap-up. Before I get to the books though, I have a couple announcements to make. So I'm really trying to expand my, I guess you could call it, bookish corner of the internet. And so I've been making some changes and some exciting things have happened. So first of all, I have opened a Patreon account. I've had a couple people ask me in the past if there's any way that they could support me, and at the time I didn't have a way, and now I have opened a Patreon account. So if you would like to support me there at all, I will link that down below. And if you support me there, you know, it helps me to make more videos for you guys, to create some better content, and of course to be able to buy books to review in the first place. So that's one exciting change that can kind of help me expand what I'm doing already. The second is that I reopened my Bookmark Shop on Store Envy, Katie's Classic Bookmarks. If you've been following me for a long time, especially on Tumblr, maybe you'll remember this shop and maybe you will have even have gotten a bookmark in the past, but I decided to reopen it because why not? I just shut it down because of like certain things I'd been going through at that time in my life, but I felt like reopening it, so I will put the link to that below as well. I make like these little handmade bookmarks that are cross-stitched and they have like little quotes on them, mostly from classic literature, but not completely. So that is another exciting thing. I do have one more exciting bit of news of something that I kind of got offered to do, but I think I'll share that in my next video when that's going more. Anyway, so let's talk about the books I read in October. The first book I finished this month was Dr. Zhivago, which is written by the Russian author Boris Pasternak, and this was first published in 1957. Amid a lot of international controversy. It was originally published in Italy and wasn't published in its home country for about 30 years. This is a Russian epic about a man named Yuri Zhivago, who is a doctor and a poet, and he is living in very tumultuous times amid World War and revolution in his country. And he's just trying to do the best thing for his family. There's also a love story and how that plays out during all of this, and how through all of this he tries to still find the beauty in life and in nature and to write, which is his passion. Now, I gave this 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. I didn't love it, but I really appreciate it. Like, it started out and I was really into it, and then for a while I just wasn't sure what I was going to make of it. It's not a happy book, it's kind of intense. And then at the end, the point just kind of came to me and it all came together, and I ended up thinking this was quite beautiful, and I really, like I said, ended up appreciating it. So through this book we see a couple things on more of a non-personal level. We see another country in a certain period of history and just how the people were upset with their government and how just things weren't fair and going for them, but yet the mode that they tried to go about fixing this, aka communism, didn't work, and how it just caused this gruesome revolution and so much strife and really wreaked havoc on this country. So we see just another example of that, which is sad, but then this is really the story about Dr. Zhivago, or Yuri Zhivago, and how he is this man who is just attuned to these like higher planes of existence. He sees the beauty in life and the universe, and he has such lovely sensibilities of the world around him, and he loves his family, and then he loves Laura, his lover, and he just wants to experience these things, but he's living in such a difficult time for him to just appreciate these things and to live his life, because he's living in such a bloody and tumultuous period of history, and he's thrown into it, and his life is in a total uproar because of this. And I thought that was an interesting exploration. For a while it seems like a political book, and like I said, while it does show, it's for a historical novel, it does very much show this portrayal of this period of history, and so, like I said, you do see some of the problems with that and whatnot, but it isn't a political book, really. Zhivago, he doesn't take sides. He doesn't agree with the whites, and he doesn't agree with the Bolsheviks, and he is very critical of what they've been doing. This is really just about a man who loves beauty and loves life, and what happens when a person like that is thrown into this horrible political situation. And I bet Zhivago is probably based a little bit on Boris Pasternak himself and a lot of his own views and feelings, as he was a poet. This was actually his only novel and stuff like that. Now, there is a very famous love story in this book. A lot of, I don't know if my edition doesn't say that, but a lot of editions will say one of the greatest love stories of all time. But the love story isn't really the main point of this book. It doesn't take up a lot of this book. It really is one of those Russian epics about a man in a period of, in history. But the love story is very important. Dr. Zhivago meets this woman named Laura, and Laura is she's so beautiful and tragic yet strong, and she shares Dr. Zhivago's love of life and all things beautiful, and they understand each other in this way, and they almost need each other in this way, and they're living in a point of history where relationships and family and whatnot, there's not much place for them. The family dynamic, and because you were seeing them before, and the family dynamic with the husbands and wives and the children, they're just falling apart because the country is such a mess that, that ideal kind of is disintegrating a little bit, and there isn't much room for it, which is frustrating to Dr. Zhivago as well. And there just doesn't seem much room even for romance in general, but yet Dr. Zhivago and Laura are drawn to each other out of this need, because they both have this need to see the beauty in life and, to be in touch with this ethereal side of things. And they both need that, and it's through each other that they kind of find that and find this, I don't know if it's peace, something like that, a kind of peace that they can't find elsewhere, only with each other. And so I thought their love story was very beautiful and poignant. Anyways, yeah, so this was good. It was not, something that I loved, and it was difficult and sad at some points, but when it all came together, I came away with a very big appreciation of this novel, and think that it's very beautiful, and I do recommend it if you have any interest in this book. It is well worth the read. The second book I finished this month was Beloved by Toni Morrison, and this was published in 1987, and it also won the Pulitzer Prize in 1988. And I gave this 5 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. So I really liked this, obviously. This is my second time reading Toni Morrison. My first was Song of Solomon, which it's been quite a few years since I've read. But I really loved it, and it was about time that I got to another one of her books, and this, I believe, is like her most famous, and I was pretty interested in it. So this one follows a woman named Seth, and the years kind of following slavery, and she is haunted by her dead baby. And the only name we really know her baby by is Beloved, because that's the one word that was on her tombstone. And Seth and her daughter Denver are living in this house in Ohio called 124, which is haunted by Beloved. And Seth reflects back, and some of the other characters as well, on the past and then what's going on in the future. And it's like this very seamless blend of the past and the future. But a huge theme in this is the past, and how do you lay it all at rest? And does the past really ever go away? And how the past can permeate the present. How you can literally be haunted by the past, as Seth is. She's haunted by her dead baby. And Seth says an interesting thing at one point, and she says that the past never really goes away, that you could go to a place and then an event, like probably an important event that has happened there, like it's still there, like the energy of it is still there, like the event is playing out in some shape or form, which maybe is almost like her explanation for like a haunting, even in a way. So Seth is particularly haunted and can't let go of the past because she was a slave for a while at a place called Sweet Home, which is the plantation she worked at. And at first it wasn't such a bad place, and then it changed, and some rather heinous things happened there, and she escaped and ended up in Ohio, and then certain events led up to the death of her baby, which I don't really want to spoil, even though I feel like if you've heard of Beloved, you know what happened to her baby. But I still won't explain it, just in case. And so her experiences at Sweet Home and all the way leading up to the death of her baby have traumatized her, and she obviously can't let go of this part of her past, and her baby is haunting her. And so we get this exploration of what has happened in her past and what's happening in the present, and this exploration of the past. And besides that, it's an exploration of love. I feel from the two books I've read so far of Toni Morrison's, she explores love, but in a complex way. I feel like it isn't all sunshine and roses, and sometimes there's quite a moral complexity to it. But I really like the way she explores love and certain relationships. So obviously mothers and daughters their relationship are explored in here, but others as well. And of course, again, this is historical fiction, and so we are shown the horrors of slavery and that time period and how they have affected a woman's life, and how just all those people that were slaves during this period of American history, just how much they went through. And it kind of asked the question, like, how much can a person go through? And we particularly see that with Seth and her experiences. There's kind of a possibility that she may never let any of this go, and that she'll always be affected. But kind of a hopeful message at the end, although we don't get to see what happens. But there's an encouragement for Seth to just lay it all down, to finally let go of the past and try to embrace the present that she has and the future, and to accept herself there's a beautiful line that a character tells her in this, and he says to her, because she's saying, beloved, her baby, the dead baby, she was like, she was the best part of myself, and she's having a major pity party, and he says to her, no, you are your best thing. And I thought that line was a very profound message that kind of permeates kind of part of the message of this book. And yeah, for Seth to just accept what has happened, to accept the choices she has made, and to know that at the time she thought that was the best thing, and that's all she can do, and to kind of be at peace with it. Yeah, so this explores, like I said, there's a lot of horrible things in here that are very intense, but there's like this circling around it, and there's this mystical, magical realism, kind of paranormal element going on, especially on the baby and stuff that happens with that. And then the past is told in like these strange, seamless like flashbacks. So there's like these, it's like there's these horrible events that are in the center of this story, but then there's these magical things and this looking at the past from the present, and so there's a circling around all the horrors of it, so that we see what has happened, but yet it doesn't make it so horrible. We're seeing it in this roundabout way, and somehow that makes it digestible. I don't know if that makes sense. Anyways, yeah, but I thought this was phenomenal, and I just think Toni Morrison is a really wonderful writer, and I can't wait to read more of her work. And I do highly recommend this if you haven't read this one yet or have read any Toni Morrison. Please pick her up. The third book I finished in October was The Time Machine by H.G. Wells, and this was published in 1895. And I gave this 3.5 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. Obviously, I had a little bit of trouble rating this one, but I did like it and found it interesting. Just didn't love it. So this is an early science fiction novel. I'm sure everyone has heard of H.G. Wells as one of, the fathers of science fiction, I suppose. And this follows a Victorian scientist who we just know as the time traveler. And he builds a time machine and travels into the future to the year 802,701 AD. So a story starts out, and it's told in like a layered narrative, where our narrator is a guest of the time traveler, and he goes to his house, and the time traveler lectures everybody on time, which was a very interesting lecture. I kind of enjoyed the part where he was discussing time a little bit. And then the narrator tells us all these guests return like the next week or something, and the time traveler has returned from his journey and gathers them all around the fire to tell his story. And so then when he's telling the story, the perspective shifts towards him. I feel like this is kind of a literary device that a lot of Victorian authors use, that kind of layered narrative where like a narrator other than the main character tells us the story, but then we shift to their perspective, but we're like getting it passed along, if that makes sense. Anyways, so the time traveler tells everyone of his travels into this future world, and he ends up in this pretty lush seeming world with these people called the Illylls, and they're rather elfish looking, and they seem to live in relative peace and contentment. And it seems like maybe it could be some sort of utopian society, but then he realizes that there's more to this land than he thought, because he realizes there is kind of a subterranean world, or there's stuff going on underneath the land, and there's these strange like ape-like creatures called Morlocks. And So he kind of realizes that there's a little bit more tension than there seems to be on the surface. So, I found this future world he ends up in, like, in today's time, it definitely is not believable. Like, it's not a believable future for the Earth. And I don't know if that's what he was going for, more fantastical to make a point. But it wasn't really believable. Too fantastical. There were some interesting explorations of stuff that might happen. Such as, like, all the animals are extinct and stuff like that. Like, that makes sense. But the world seemed a little too lush for the future. Especially looking at the world we're living in. But he used his story to explore class in a really interesting way without really spoiling anything. In the future, the upper class and the working class becomes so divided that it's kind of has this terrifying consequence. It's pretty scary. So it was a definitely an interesting exploration of class. And I kind of find it funny, Victorian literature, I feel like, is filled with discussions of class, because that was a really big issue, particularly in Victorian England. And so it's funny that in science fiction of that time period, of course, what they're exploring in the future is class division. So that was pretty interesting. Anyways, but this future world, it does seem so weirdly fantastical, and it reminded me of The Wizard of Oz, and I'm pretty sure this predates The Wizard of Oz. So that's kind of interesting, but there was something very Wizard of Oz weird about it. After he decides to finally get out of this future world, he decides to, there's just like a brief chapter, I think, to travel further into the future, because he's really curious as to what happens. So he sits in his time machine and he keeps it going to the future, and that was really interesting, and that was more believable. He's just like sitting in this one place and he's watching the world change and people disappear as the sun slowly dies, and that was really eerie and beautiful and kind of sad, and like I said, that was much more believable. Yeah, anyways, so this wasn't lovable, but it was very fascinating. It was interesting to see his exploration of the future. While some things were more believable and others weren't, it was all an interesting ride. And if you have any interest, this is just a very short book, so you might as well check it out. And I definitely want to check out more H.G. Wells. I'm kind of curious about older science fiction, so I haven't read very much. I just recently read, I think it was last month, I read Jules Verne for the first time, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And so then I thought I'd read H.G. Wells, because they're both kind of considered fathers of science fiction. I like to continue with both of them. And there's some other older science fiction books I have on my to-read list as well that I'll get to eventually, so it's all kind of interesting. The fourth book I finished this month was my poetry collection for the month, and that was Idylls of the King by Alfred Lord Tennyson. And the poems in this collection were published in between 1856 and 1874. And I gave this 3 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. So I've been reading a lot of contemporary poetry, so I don't know if you remember me saying, but I wanted to read some more classic poetry in the next few months, and so I started with this one. And while it was interesting, I wouldn't say I loved it, so I'll keep trying with poetry. Anyways, Alfred Lord Tennyson was poet laureate in his day and was a big favorite of Queen Victoria. And he uses the myths and legends of King Arthur to kind of explore Victorian ideas and ideals, or maybe compare them a little bit. So recently, if you've been watching my videos, you'll know that I read L'Amour d'Arthur, which is, kind of the classic rendition of King Arthur from the 15th century. So after reading that, I was curious about a few adaptations, and I'd read the poem by Tennyson, The Lady of Shalott, before, which was really beautiful. I was like, oh, that might be kind of fun to read poetry based on King Arthur after having read that poem, but the Lady of Shalott was not in here, so that was kind of sad, but it's okay. It was still interesting, even though I didn't love it. So this is definitely epic poetry, and that retells the myths of King Arthur. It's written in kind of blank verse. It's not, so to me, it just doesn't seem very poetic or seem to have like what I would think of as like a normal poetic flow. They more read like stories that are poetic. So in a poetry kind of way, I don't know if I loved it. But like I said, it was interesting. So Tennyson obviously compares Camelot with Victorian England a little bit. And I feel like he treats Arthur as like the ideal Victorian man, but then he explores, obviously Arthur's kingdom falls apart because he explores that while Arthur may have all these great qualities, humans have these pitfalls, and it kind of ended up destroying his like idyllic kingdom. And even there's in the last poem, which is just a poem to Queen Victoria, he kind of says, I guess he kind of compares like Victorian England as what he thinks is as an idyllic place, and how he hopes though that in this era human pitfalls won't ruin her kingdom. So while I don't know if I like loved the fact that, he was glorifying Victorian ideals and it had like a very nationalistic message. I don't know if I loved that, but it was interesting to see how he used the myths and legends of King Arthur kind of to fit into his own time and his own purposes. And I think that's something really interesting about the legends of King Arthur is I can use those stories to fit different messages and different time periods, and so I'm interested to see as I continue. There's a few more books I want to read that are retellings, not poetry though. I'm interested to see how that continues. Besides that though, he did explore the relationships between people a lot more, so I liked that. Certain one-on-one relationships are explored, and certain themes such as jealousy and trust issues and unrequited love and adultery and all these kinds of, I guess, tougher relationship issues were kind of explored more, and you get just a more of an inside view of some of the interpersonal relationships of Camelot, especially the romantic ones were explored in this, but not completely. And that was interesting. So while this was interesting and an interesting read after L'Amour d'Arthur, I didn't love it. Not my favorite poetry, not necessarily my favorite meaning, but still always interesting. But I don't know how much I'd recommend this unless you're really curious and this sounds like something you'd be interested in, then go for it. But I don't know if I highly recommend this. It takes a while to get through. It's a longer collection of poetry. Well, maybe if you don't want to read L'Amour d'Arthur and you're looking for like an older rendition of those stories, and maybe you have an interest in like Victorian literature and do like epic poetry and stuff like that, then maybe you would like this. Fifth and final book I read this month was the short story The Legend of Sleepy Hollow by Washington Irving. And this was published in 1820, and I gave this 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. This was given to me as a gift right at the end of the month, and I'm really glad it was given to me because it was a lovely little read to finish up October. And I actually read most of this on Halloween, which was perfect. So, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow takes place in New York in this sleepy little village called Sleepy Hollow. And it is the scene of many legends and ghostly encounters and just kind of has this mystical, spooky atmosphere. And in this town resides a man named Ichabod Crane, who is the local schoolmaster. And he desires to win the hand of the kind of local flirt named Katrina. And he has a rival named Brom Bones. And one fateful night, it all kind of turns into mayhem, and which includes Ichabod having an encounter with the famous local specter, the Headless Horseman. So, this was not scary, first of all. I didn't realize how comedic this was. This was meant to be a rather comedic story, but with a lot of atmosphere. You know, there was a lot of lovely description of nature, actually, especially of autumn, and it was just this lovely autumnal setting of a lot of atmosphere, and then a very comedic story with these characters that just seemed like caricatures. Ichabod Crane was just so ridiculous. The descriptions of him were actually pretty funny, but he's just so goofy and but pompous and selfish and not really likable at all. And then Katrina's kind of a product of her time, let's be honest, but she's quite the little flirt. And then Brom Bones reminded me so much of Gaston from Beauty and the Beast, especially in like the Disney version. So that was pretty funny. Yeah, and so this was like a delightful, atmospheric, hilarious little short story to finish out my reading month and to read on Halloween, which was nice. And this is also Washington Irving is kind of like one of the fathers of American literature, so that's kind of interesting to read as well. So I enjoyed this, and I recommend this if you've never read this little short story. So those are all the books that I read in October. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as usual, if you want to talk to me, feel free to comment below. Let me know if you have read any of these books and your thoughts on them. And what else? As usual, you can, I'll link both my Tumblr and my Goodreads in case you're interested in reading any of my written reviews. You can find them there. And I'll also put a link to my Patreon account, like I said, so I would love it if you are interested in supporting me. And I'll also link my Bookmark Shop in case you happen to be interested in a bookmark. Alrighty, that's all. So until next time, bye!